Okay, this video, I'm going to put a few links over in the live chat, um, just so y'all can have at least some reference to what the heck I'm talking about. One of the things I want to talk about is guns. A lot of people had these great ideas about these guns that are going to get them through World War III. Well, that's just crazy. If you're homeless, especially. See, the reason that the homeless are the most victimized people in America, even by police, is because we are not likely to be armed. That's because we are harassed a lot, and without a legal residence where you can store such things, it's illegal to own them. If you're homeless, you might have an address, you might not. It's difficult. If you do have an address, it's usually somebody else's address that you had to borrow so you could get your ID so you could try to get a job. Now, there's a lot of people, all sorts of going crazy about assault rifles. No such thing. If somebody's going to go assassinate someone, it's not going to be with a rifle, it's going to be with a handgun. 22 long rifle is the most common. The reason for that is because of concealability. You can hide a 22 handgun just about anywhere, and it fires a tiny 22 long rifle round. It's not actually something that has to go through a rifle, obviously. And there are many 22 pistols out there. When it comes to a rifle, those have a more specific use. Those are mostly for target hunting or actual hunting. We've got semi-auto rifles. There's not a whole lot of difference between one semi-auto and another. Now, how they work, one could vary a lot from another. The rounds per minute that it fires could vary a lot from one to another. But the basic principles are pretty well the same. Whether you use a blowback, a delayed blowback, a piston charge, or a direct impingement, those are all specifics of how they make it work. But in reality, you're just trying to put a lot of rounds downrange. You want a quick second shot or follow-up shot. And if you're talking about the difference between something like a Mini 14 and an M16, they're both semi-auto. They both have equal rounds. Depending on which models you get, they fire the same exact round. But in reality, neither one is an assault rifle. It's just a rifle, a semi-automatic rifle. Now, we got a lot of survival sites coming up because you notice on your Facebook feed, your news feed, there's all these people, hundreds and hundreds of them, posting up about how they're thinking about going off and living in the woods. They just want to go off and live in the woods. And as a result, we got all these survival experts. They want to pop up a bunch of stuff about which guns you want to take with you. You don't want to take any guns with you. Guns are loud, they draw attention, and they get you in a lot of trouble just because you have them. As far as self-defense goes, well, it's probably a good idea to get not a rifle. By the time you've gone to where your rifle is and pulled it out, and yeah, nobody's going to stop while you do that. Nobody's going to go, all right, well, I'm in the middle of the street shooting people, and You're in a survival situation. You're not going to have the chance to go all the way home, get your gun out of your gun locker or your gun safe, and then bring it back. Handgun, you can get in, you can get out. It doesn't draw a lot of attention. It's not like you're walking down the street with a rifle strapped to your back. Now, they got different pack strategies. Some of them are for 3-day packs. Let's say you've got your get home pack, your 3-day survival pack, and then you've got your camp setup pack. Your get home bag is basically, it's a purse or a small backpack or a fanny pack, something like that. It's not meant for, long term. It's just what you need just to get yourself home. Um, and again, I do not recommend putting a firearm in that. Even if you have a concealed carry permit to have it, I still don't recommend it. There's just too much that can go wrong. A police officer could put a hole through you before you get a chance to utter out the words that you have a permit. um, so let's talk about the three main types of packs. You've got your get home pack, and that's some change for the phone is what it used to be back in the 80s and the 90s. Today, everybody's got a cell phone, and payphones are pretty rare, but a phone card is pretty important nowadays. If you have a phone card, that could help. But it is recommended that you have a phone, whether you have it in your day pack or not. If you have a survival situation, let's say you live in Minneapolis, Minnesota, but somebody just dropped a nuke on New York, and everybody in America is all sorts of paranoid. Or maybe there's some sort of a super flu that's going through your neighborhood, and everybody's paranoid. You just found out you're at work, you got to get home. What do you need to get home? And that varies from place to place. Maybe it's a bus pass. Maybe there's a problem with your vehicle and you can't get it out of the parking lot. Be that somebody stole it, or maybe there's just too much traffic, or there's just too many people and there's no way you're ever going to possibly get it out, or any other number of possibilities. You still want to be able to get yourself home. But then there's the fact that a lot of those services may not be running. They might be shut down all emergency like what happened on 9/11. So you want to keep your get home pack simple. You want to put in some calories because you never know, you might be stuck out there a night or two. You want to have your calories. You want to have a couple of emergency blankets. One is never enough. Those little cheap Mylar ones, I think it's Mylar. They do work pretty good for keeping you warm. You probably won't get much sleep because they sound like a trash bag, but it's something. Then you're going to want to have stuff like matches, of course, a lighter, a little bit of kindling, and probably at least a couple of, well, what I like to use is tea candles and have a can of tuna fish in case of emergencies. And then a nail and something to pound in with the nail. If you get tuna fish in oil, you can actually use the tuna fish can. Just stick a wick, poke a hole in the top of it, stick a wick in it, and light the wick. It'll suck up the oils, and although it won't smell good, it'll be enough to keep you warm. Um, and that really comes down to learning ahead of time. Um, a compass is pretty important too. If you're in the middle of the city, perhaps not so much. You probably know the area pretty well. If you're out in the country, it's probably a good idea to have a compass. The 3-day pack. Um, this is for once you get home. You got your survival pack next to the door. Your kids got their packs. Your wife's got her pack, or your husband's got his, whatever. You've got your packs. They're already ready. They've got emergency food in them. They've got emergency water, which should also go. This should go in all packs, matter of fact. You've got your water filtration system and or water purification pills, things of that nature. Um, you definitely want to take a lot more calories, and you want to take string, things of that nature. Um, the purpose of a survival pack and survival camp is that you're trying to go up there with as little as possible, but enough tools that you can actually get the job done and survive up there for possibly weeks, months, or even years if need be. So it's important to have identification tabs or identification cards or identification sheets for local wildlife and also for local plants. So you know what you can eat, you know what you can't eat, and you know what animals are in the area, so you're prepared for any of those dangers. A kitchen camp is entirely different. A kitchen camp is where you've got a group of people that all need taken care of, similar to a refugees camp, I suppose. Um, you're going to need at least some basic medicines. You need alcohol swabs, first aid kit. First aid kit is important for all three types of packs. But the third type of pack, let's say you've got a family and you've got everything that you need for um, a kitchen camp. What you're going to want to do is everybody's got their basic survival pack, and then you divvy up what would go to the kitchen camp. Each person carries a small portion of what you need for a longer kitchen camp. Supplies. Lots of people go up there prepared for, just a few days. They get some seasoning packets and a small salt shaker and a small thing of pepper, and they think they're going to be good. Well, you might not be down the mountain for a whole week. You never know. People tend to hoard the stuff that they need the least. It's important if you are going to hoard stuff that you hoard things like salt. It would be worth it if everybody carried something and you have one person who is, and I mean this literally, one person whose sole job is to carry a 50-pound bag of salt. You're just going to need it. You can use it for everything from tanning to medication to sterilization. Salt is just really good stuff. You can cure meats with it. I mean, that's pretty important if you want to be able to, let's say you want to live on rabbits all the time, but you might not always have the chance to get rabbits for dinner. You might end up with a deer and you guys can't possibly eat it all in one sitting. It's going to go bad if you leave it out, but you can salt it. I do recommend at least looking a couple of videos up on how to salt some meat. And I recommend trying to salt some meat from the store before you do anything, because that way you have the experience. There's a big difference between theory and experience. When you've experienced it, it's no longer theory. And if it's no longer theory, it's something that you know works. And as a result, it's something that you will probably go to when there's the need for it. Or if it's just a theory, you haven't ever cured any meat, you've only thought about it, or you've heard on a couple of videos that you watched about curing meat or how the Native Americans used to cure meat. So you know people did it, but you don't know the techniques. That's pretty important. Now, when it comes to the different kinds of camps, a survival camp is usually temporary. It's something that you're traveling back to civilization, you're traveling back to get help, you're traveling back for medical needs, whatever it happens to be, but you're moving the whole time. Or in some cases, you're trying to get away from society. But in either case, this is your smaller camp on the way to, well, a kitchen camp would be a long-term camp. One of the kitchen camps that I was a part of, it lasted for a year and a half. And on any given night, we could have up to 30 people there. It's important to pack up only what you need. But keep in mind, if you're going to live off of the land, you still need resources to do that. You still need tools. You either need to know how to make your own tools out of what's around you, which is a great idea. You watch all these videos about how to survive in the woods and how to make your own rope off in the woods, and then you get stuck in the middle of Nebraska. You don't know where the hell you are, and the only stuff that you have is local grasses. You're going to be a lot more dependent upon your pack for everything from shelter from the wind to shelter from the rain, shelter from the sun. There ain't a lot of trees out here. Now, a lot of people, especially these survival gurus and nuts, they got this full-size M16 that they can fit into a backpack. Woohoo! Well, now you've got a backpack full of weight. It's full of ammo. It's full of your gun, and it's taking up a lot of space. If you get busted with it, you're probably going to prison. And really, when you're trying to get from one place to another, especially in a situation where the whole United States is under a state of emergency, you're talking about a situation where if somebody's pulling a gun on you, you don't have time to pull yours out. You don't have time to say, hey, hold up a second. I got to pull this thing off of my back, assemble my firearm. Don't shoot me long enough for me to. No, they're not going to do that. They're not going to take the time to do that if they're trying to rob you. If they have some sort of vengeance thing against you, they're not going to stop and let you put together your gun. It's just not going to happen. You need to prepare for eventualities that you can actually do something about. Now, there's a lot of people who believe that the United States is always going to be like it was back in the 1950s. There are people who were that stuck in their youth and their childhood, and they seem to think that everybody gets, well, things that they don't. The United States, hey, it could last for 10,000 years. Who knows? China's lasted a while. Of course, you look at its type of government, it's not the same government it was 100 years ago, not by a long shot. And 100 years ago, it wasn't nearly anywhere close to what it was 100 years before that. I mean, sure, China itself has existed a long time. Asia as a continent exists, whether there are national borders declared or not. The chunk of land is still there. Whether you call it China or Magnolia, or you could call it Colt for all I care. It's still the same chunk of land, regardless of what you call it. And regardless of what government currently is in control of it. Now, it's pretty obvious that the government does not care about the citizens of the United States. So we got to look out for each other, and we definitely got to look out for ourselves. It's kind of like when you're on an airplane and they say, hey, if you've got a kid next to you and the masks drop, put yours on first, because you can't help anybody out if you're passed out. And that's kind of the way that it goes with everything else. If you can't, let's see, long range survival pack. We'll click on this one. Copy link address. This one right here is to a channel called Grand Thumb. And this guy's more into the guns thing. But he also talks about how there's a difference between tactical packs and gunfighter setups. He does videos on both. Grand Thumb was in the military, and there's a big difference between an assault pack and a bush camp pack. I mean, you got different purposes altogether. You don't need a plate carrier if you're gonna be going up into the woods and all you're hunting is dinner. If you have people shooting at you, well, that's a different story altogether. We're not to that point yet. But with all these people who have this great idea of going off in the woods, they really need to know what they're getting into. And most people don't. They have concepts, but once they get out there, they don't even know where to get started. When we had the kitchen camp, if we ran out of rope, there was people who made rope. People knew how to make rope, no matter what was nearby. If all we had was trees and tree bark, we could make rope out of that. If all we had was local grasses, there's people who can make rope out of it. I'm one of them. And learning how to make rope is not a complicated process. You can look at all sorts of YouTube videos that show you how to do that. Now, when it comes to a kitchen camp, if you've got a family, you've probably got a kitchen camp and everybody does their part. You've got people who go and collect the food. You've got people who can identify which mushrooms are toxic and which ones aren't. You've got people who can identify, which animals are most likely to have diseases at certain points of the year. Um, but again, everybody's got to have a job. Everybody's got to work together in that situation. It'd be nice if we worked together now so that we don't end up stuck in that situation, but we are not likely to have that. Now, there's a lot of situations that we end up running into from day to day that might make us crazy, might make us paranoid, might make us believe that something might come sooner or later. The thing about an eventuality, it's kind of like living at the base of a volcano. Eventually, that volcano is going to blow its top. It's going to happen. Now, whether it happens this year or next year, or it goes dormant for a couple of thousand years before it finally blows, or blows for a second or third or fifth or eighth time. Some of these larger volcanoes that we have, we've got evidence that they've blown multiple times. So it is an eventuality. Just when is it going to happen? Kind of like we hear a lot of people saying, it's the end times, it's the end of the world, the end of the world is nigh. Well, that's sort of true for each and every one of us. We're going to end sometime. We don't get to live forever. There is no fountain of youth. So it's kind of true. But also, people have been saying that since the beginning of time. I am certain of it. Through my entire life, I got to hear about Y2K was going to be the end of it. And 9/11 was the end of it all. And people were telling us back in the 80s that the commies were going to end us all with nuclear weapons. And, you know, sure, we're in the end times. If it makes you feel better, I'll say we're in the end times. But in reality, I don't give two shits. In reality, whether you're right or you're wrong, survival is important. I'm not going to just ignore my family because somebody wants to prophesize because they've been listening to a bunch of friggin' hoopla over at church. I don't care about your end of the world theories. I don't. Between some magical unicorn coming down to rescue me and me rescuing myself, chances are pretty good that I'm not going to be able to depend on the fucking unicorn. I'm also not going to be able to depend on 14 or 15 pounds worth of excess gear that is for pointing at other human beings and takes time to pull off of my back and set up and get ready and get prepared. Who's got time for that? Now, there's, of course, the fact that it is an eventuality. No country goes peaceful for very long. There's lots of countries that we like to think of as peaceful, but even they have wars, internal conflicts, and strife. Here in the United States, even our own soldiers are coming back from places like Iraq and Afghanistan and being anti government. We've got some of them that hated what they did over there so much that they're committing suicide in record numbers. We have lost more veterans to suicide than to enemy action in the last 30 years. 40 years, sorry. So when people have these sites and they talk about these guns that they need and all that, that's people who live in fantasy. In reality, if things are bad enough that you need that gun, you're going to need a smaller one, or there'll be plenty laying around. The gun is not the most important part. When it comes to survival, sometimes it's best to move on in the other direction as opposed to standing and shooting at a superior numbers with superior drones and superior helicopters, and you guys don't own any of those things. So what's the point? When it comes to guerrilla warfare, how about guerrilla survival? The longer you can hold out, the more resources and the more of a supply line is used. That makes it more expensive. If it's more expensive to try to hunt you down, eventually, and in a situation like this, there will be a lot of people like that, eventually they're going to have to submit. And that has been shown time and time again throughout history. If you can just hold out, take a look at Afghanistan. 20 years we've been over there, and they just held out. Held out until we pulled out. Political maneuvering. I got a lot of stuff that I got to take care of, so I'm going to turn off this video. Here's one. Let's see. Copy link address. I'm putting these over here just to make sure that you have access to them. Really, there's a lot of these different videos, and I don't really want to click through 400 of them. If you just look up survival packs, basic survival packs, day packs, go bags, things of that nature, you'll notice the differences. This guy Grand Thumb, the one whose stuff I posted up, he's pretty popular. He's got over 10 million subscribers. He also, even with his military experience, in at least 3 of his videos about go bags and packs, he talks about how it's probably not a good idea to be carrying a firearm. And also about how important it is to pick the right one. If it's going to be cumbersome, it's going to be a lot of extra weight, and you're carrying a bunch of really big ammunition that's heavy, and you're carrying an overabundance of it. I mean, really, you're not Rambo. Food is a lot more important in those situations. And if there is a situation where you need to defend yourself and you do need to have a firearm and you live in an area where you know that it's important, something small is important. You're going to be targeted if you have anything bigger than a handgun. You are going to be set apart from everybody who doesn't have one. You are going to be posted as a threat, and people do not do good things to someone they consider a threat. Also, when it comes to a lot of the paranoia, we've got a lot of people who are being killed over paranoia. So if you've got a gun with all these shootings that have been going on, a lot of people are paranoid of anybody with a gun, and they're likely to call the cops and get you killed, even if you only have that gun for self-defense. Now, we got several situations where self-defense has come in, especially with the BLM movement, where we've got the gun rights are being changed depending on who it is. We've got one guy recently who he was up in Oregon and he disarmed 2 people who had guns that they had taken out of a police cruiser. And this guy pointed a gun at 2 other people and he was called a hero. Whereas there's a man who was killed in Austin, Texas, and I believe his last name was Foster, Garrett Foster. He had a gun as well. He was not pointing it at people, and he was shot to death by somebody who drove into the middle of the crowd in BLM, was screaming some crazy shit, and then pulled the trigger. So Garrett Foster was murdered, and his murderer gets away with it. Meanwhile, this other man gets to point guns at people and take guns away from people, and somehow he's the good guy. I don't get that. I don't get why we change the rules based on who it is. I don't get why the media, the news media, gets away with saying whatever they want and not doing any fact checking, especially when it destroys human lives. But I do get the pull to the woods. I do get why so many of you want to go off in the woods and why so many of you want to get away from society. I get that part entirely. It is important to learn some woodworking skills. It's important that if you're going to go up and run a kitchen camp, that you have at least one hand saw. It's important that you have a hatchet, or if you're willing to carry the extra weight, you can carry a full-size axe, but that also depends on the area that you live in. Um, I guess there's a lot of other stuff that I could cover, but when it really comes down to it, you should probably go out and go camping. Figure out how much you can reasonably carry, how far you can reasonably carry it. Once you're up at camp and you've got it all set up and you've been there for a day, you'll notice some things that you probably should have brought. Once you've been up there for a week, you realize there's a lot of crap that you brought that you really have no need for. A sewing kit, whether you need it or not, you should take it, because it's better to have it and not need it than to need it and not have it. I cannot say the same for a firearm. For the most part, and this isn't the same in every situation. If it's a guerrilla war and you are being hunted or pursued simply because you're an American, well, you should probably find a way. But in most cases, when you're just trying to get away from everybody, you don't need a gun to do that. It's going to be cumbersome. It's going to inhibit your abilities. And if you're trying to follow the laws, well, you can't cross over any borders. You can't cross over from the state of Colorado to the state of Nebraska with a firearm that's registered in Colorado. It's a federal crime. However, if you gotta pack your way out of the state of Colorado because all the roads are shut down and you gotta go up through the mountains into Wyoming, well, you're definitely gonna need to eat the whole time that you're out there. You should probably carry some food, and when you carry food, meat is, you know, something that should not be at the top of your list. Lightweight stuff like oatmeal. Oatmeal is good for you. It helps to replenish the energies that are burned up, especially when you're going on long hiking trips. You're going to lose weight fast. Oatmeal helps you to not lose the weight so fast. When you find a place where you're reasonably safe, I recommend learning some camouflage skills. Learn which plants in the area will grow up the side of whatever you grow. Learn which ones are going to be growing quickly or bushy or things of that nature. That way, wherever you happen to go, even if you have to leave for a while, you can come back to your same place as long as it's camouflaged well enough, nobody will ever find it. Um, this video is pretty long, so I'm sorry for talking so long. I'm going to end it now. Y'all be safe, stay out of trouble, or don't get caught.